Ali from our small community asked a question. He asked if I would make a video on my personal experience of the progressive and direct path, and I thought that was a very good idea. So if we're going to discuss what the differences are, what my personal experience is, then first we need to think about what is the progressive path and how does that differ from the direct path. Now, one could say that everything that you've learnt since being a young child up into the present day is included within the progressive path. And so you might ask, well, if I was practicing the direct path last week, how is that the progressive path? Now, this point won't be easily understood without actually having experience of what is the direct path. So first, what I thought I would do is I would discuss a little bit about what the difference is between method and wisdom. So most people have heard of these two terms, this concept of method and wisdom that exists within the Buddha Dharma. And there are ways of thinking about method and wisdom in terms of the transcendent perfections, the six perfections, or the six paramitas. And in some texts, then it talks about a method as being included within the first three paramitas, that of generosity, of discipline, and patience. And then wisdom aspect being included within the last two, concentration and intelligence. And that the one in the middle, diligence, is sort of a helper for both method and wisdom. So that's one interpretation, but also sometimes it's taught that only intelligence itself is actual wisdom and that everything else is included within method. But that's kind of like a scriptural understanding of method and wisdom. And so I want to put this in kind of more common terms so you can understand what these two terms mean beyond just being mere concepts. So if I wanted to learn some subject, let's say English literature, the English written language, then I would start off by learning the alphabet. And to learn the alphabet, then there are various different techniques. So we're all familiar with this sort of song that children sing. They go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So that is a method for coming to learn or to memorize the alphabet, right? And in that, then you're going to associate with the shapes of the letters and the sounds that they make. And so by singing this, then young children very quickly learn their alphabet. Now, at the point when you've learnt the alphabet, that becomes a type of intelligence, a type of wisdom or understanding. And it is once one has learnt the goal of that particular methodology, that method has transformed into wisdom. But it's not the case that this sort of just recognizing all the letters of the alphabet and being able to produce their sounds orally, that one has some kind of ultimate understanding of the English language. So then what happens is our knowledge of the alphabet becomes itself a new form of method. And what we do is we use those letters that we've memorized in our mind to start to form words, like we'd go C-A-T, cat, D-O-G, dog. And so the child then learns to take that alphabet and turn it into a sort of understanding of vocabulary and words. And then we use pictures of things like cats and dogs, and we have the words written out in big letters, and we kind of recite the spelling of this vocabulary. So that memorization of the spelling of the letters that we'd previously learned becomes a new type of methodology. And by that, we build up a kind of lexicon of words. We build up our understanding of basic vocabulary. And this is the same in many different types of languages. So again, this newfound knowledge, this kind of wisdom that we've acquired, this intelligence that we've developed, which is the understanding of the English alphabet, then gets used itself as method. So it becomes, from wisdom, it becomes method. And using that method, we come to a new type of understanding or knowledge, and that new understanding becomes a new type of wisdom, and that will be basic vocabulary. And then using that vocabulary, we start to form sentences, I have a cat, for example. And by that, then we develop some increased level of wisdom. So there must be an ultimate goal. And within the English language, then it's to come to a certain level where we can sort of read and write the English language. But there's a problem with this analogy. As I've mentioned before, then, for example, with the boat analogy, then we don't ever perfect sailing. There's always some flaws there, and even the best sailor in the world has their bad days. And when it comes to the English language, then, we can only become so good at the language. I mean, we can become a PhD of the English language, and we never achieve kind of Buddhahood in the English language because there's always more room for progress. Not only that, the English language itself is always kind of in flux. It's changing all the time. We're adding new words to our dictionary, and also the way people write, the style, etc., evolves over time. So it never becomes a fixed or perfect thing. So there's a difference here between the spiritual path and these sort of analogies, these worldly analogies. But it is the same in that on the spiritual path, what was originally method brings us to some new understanding that becomes a type of wisdom, and then we progress in stages until we achieve the ultimate state of wisdom, which is the perfection of intelligence, the paramita of intelligence. And that is what becomes enlightenment. And ultimately, when we become an ultimately enlightened Buddha, let's say, in the Buddhist tradition, then we've perfected all of our methodology, and it has become only wisdom. So the goal of the progressive path and the goal of the direct path are both the same. It's to get to this state of the perfection of intelligence or the perfection of wisdom. Now, the way in which these differ, these two paths, the progressive path and the direct path, is that one is based on understanding things in terms of concepts. And so we use conceptual ideas in order to come to understanding. But at some point, as I said previously, this progressive path has to leap over into direct perception of the truth of the nature of reality. So the progressive path only goes so far. What is happening is that our mind is coming closer and closer to the truth, to understanding that, being accommodating of the truth of phenomena. For example, let's say we take the concept of emptiness, then we study the 16 emptinesses. And we study it in some depth and detail. And this makes our mind more accepting of the truth of emptiness. Now, somebody online asked a very good question, and they said, what is the difference between the principle of emptiness? Where does the border lie between the principle of emptiness and the actual ontological truth of emptiness, how emptiness abides in reality? And when it comes to the middle way, then there isn't actually a principle of emptiness. In the Madhyamaka, or the middle way reasoning, then there is no principle. And when I say that, I'm talking about the consequentialist school. That's a difficult and deep topic, but basically this school, which is the school of Nagarjuna, then relies on this non-assertive or non-implicative negations. So what happens is that people make statements, they make logical statements, they make conceptual statements about reality, and then we look at the consequences that arise out of that statement. And so if people make statements that are fallacious about the true nature of reality, then there are sort of illogical consequences, and these can be pointed out. It's taught in the 16 emptinesses that emptiness itself is empty, so it doesn't exist as something real. And that's a bit difficult to understand. So anyway, Ali's question was, what are my personal experiences of the progressive and direct path? So as you know, when I started out, then I was a yoga teacher, and this was kind of my spiritual foundation. I mean, since a young age, I had an interest in these principal metaphysical paradoxes. So I had these questions in my mind about what is the true nature of reality, and they were not satisfied by trite statements that you hear. For example, God created everything. Well, immediately then the question is, where did God come from? Or the universe came from the Big Bang. And then one has to ask, well, what happened before the Big Bang? So in my quest, then I started off by studying yoga. And I was kind of lucky in a way because I was able to more or less dip into the various 8 branches of yoga, or the Ashtanga. We have this practice of yama and niyama. So these are the kind of internal and external disciplines, the things to do and the things not to do. So these are prohibitions and the things that we try to adopt. In Buddhism, then we talk about what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. So it's very similar in that. And these are things that are more or less common to all religions. These religions that teach you to engage in negativity are quite rare. For the most part, we can say that these things to be adopted and things to be abandoned are very similar between the different traditions. And they're kind of a preparation of the ground. It's preparing my body and mind through conduct in order to be able to come to realize the truth. And this is part of the progressive path. And this was part of my personal progressive path, was to study yoga. And then the thing we're mostly familiar with is asana. So this asana is the use of the body. And now the way it is taught in the yoga scriptures is that the asana is something that you do to prepare yourself for meditation. And I was aware of this, and my primary interest had always been in meditation, but it's rather difficult to get authentic meditation instruction in your kind of community yoga class that you do once a week. And so one has to kind of delve in a bit deeper. You have to go to some greater extreme in order to get these kind of more profound instructions. What generally we get in the West is we just get this kind of physical practice, and for most people it becomes a form of kind of exercise. It's a bit like doing Pilates or doing aerobics. The yama and the niyam, asana, and we have pranayama. So this pranayama is the breath control, and I think it's something that most people have done. And it's very good because it's a way of stilling the mind. And we need to look into stilling of the mind. We have to, at some point, start turning the attention inwards. And one of the best ways to prepare for this is to do this kind of breath practice, pranayama, as we say in the West, or pranayama. And I found this breath practice to be very, very positive. And again, these are things that we do on this progressive or slow path. We have to kind of coerce ourselves away from our worldly way of thinking and start turning our attention inwards. And initially, when we are what are called immature beings, then we have no concept of anything kind of inner, or we have no concept of the spiritual. Now, I have to say at this point that I don't like the term spiritual and spirituality, but it's in such common usage that there's almost nothing else that we can use to easily refer to what we call the spiritual path. And one of the reasons why I don't think that it's necessarily 100% appropriate for all spiritual practice is that the term spiritual itself implies the existence of something called spirit, whether that's the Holy Spirit or the internal spirit. It's kind of like saying soulism. But anyway, I'm very happy to use the term because I think everybody understands what this means. So on this progressive path, and we have to kind of prepare the body and mind. And prepare the body and mind for what? Prepare the body and mind for an investigation of how appearances, thoughts, feelings arise to the mind. And so if it's really only a practice of meditation, it's primarily involved with the mind, then why do we work with the body? Well, the problem is our physical state dictates how we interact with the world. And so doing asana is very kind of useful to kind of calm ourselves down. Everyone who has done yoga will have this experience. At the end of a yoga class, people often feel very relaxed. And this is really important. Again, as immature beings, then we only look outwards to the world, and we're kind of carried away by outer appearances. We hear a nice sound, we see a pleasant form, we're immediately attracted to that. Likewise, if outside there's a big noise from the garbage truck coming around, and then that sort of distracts us. So by doing our practice of the physical yogas and the breath yogas, then we kind of stabilize our body, and it makes the body kind of more relaxed. And when the body is relaxed, then the mind is relaxed. There's this correlation, isn't there, between this body and mind. So if we're sort of in pain physically, or we're sick, and then it kind of distracts our mind. So it's important to have the body healthy, but also have the body very calm and relaxed. And this is all part of the progressive path, because we gain some practical experience. Practical experience in just simply what it means to relax and also to control the breath. Now, there's an interesting point here, because in the past, in Western medicine, then they said that there was no way to control your heart rate, for example. There's some things that you can physically control and other things that happen kind of automatically. And they used to believe that the heart rate was not something that you could physically control. But that's been obviously proven wrong. And Westerners have come to experience in this through the practice primarily of pranayama or pranayam. And so I noticed this once I started doing yoga for a few years, that I was able to reduce my heart rate intentionally just by using yoga practice. And so that gave me some kind of insight into the process. And this insight, developing insight in this way, is part of the progressive path. But it's not the direct path. It's, again, as I've explained before, that the progressive path primarily uses objects. And they can be physical objects. For example, you can stabilize the mind by meditating on a candle. Well, most of us have done this. You can look at a statue of the Buddha, or you can meditate on a candle flame. And by meditating on that, then it kind of stabilizes the mind and fixes the mind. So you can do that. That's an external form. You can also listen or concentrate on sound. This also gives you this experience of stilling the mind. And you can concentrate on the breath, which is a very, very common form of meditation. And I don't need to go into these, because most of you have enough of experience in spiritual practice to know exactly what I'm talking about. And so from pranayam, then there's pratyahara, and this is this sort of withdrawing of the senses, drawing the senses inwards or turning the mind inwards. And then you've got dharan, which is called concentration, dhyan, which is meditative absorption. I have to say at this point that this dhyan in Hindi and in, let's say, Nepal language means concentration. So there's a kind of fine line between these types of meditation. It's not always clear what people are talking about when they talk about dharan and dhyan. In the Buddhist tradition, and this dharani actually refers to long type of mantra that we do. For example, the 100-syllable mantra. So there's some kind of vagueness in what the differences are. So basically, to start off with, you've got the things you should do, things you shouldn't do. You've got physical yogas, you've got breath yogas, and then you've got the withdrawal of the senses inwards, and then these progressive stages of meditation, dharan, dhyan, and then finally samadhi. So this samadhi is kind of the eventual goal of yoga practice. And this would be the end of the progressive path. And it'd be difficult to say that most of us have actually achieved samadhi. I mean, we like to think that we've progressed through the 8 limbs of yoga and gotten to the stage of understanding and being able to practice samadhi. But for most people, really all they ever achieve in these 8 branches of yoga is this pratyahara. They only ever achieve a slight withdrawal of the senses. And then they kind of think that that is some profound samadhi. And this is a big problem in the West, because we're kind of egotistical. It's probably to do with the way we study a subject. We think that if we know a few terms that we suddenly become very learned at something. But actually achieving this deep samadhi is very difficult. This is something that Ramana Maharshi, etc., have achieved in their lifetime. It's not really something that most yoga practitioners in the West have achieved. As I said, they only ever get to this stage of withdrawal of senses, and it kind of makes them feel really good, and they immediately jump to the conclusion that they've achieved samadhi. It's not easy achieving samadhi in any way. And for us, then we see these things to be quite ordinary. And that's why so many people these days claim to have attained awakening. And it's because they don't know anything else. For them, it just seems amazing. It's like when a child first learns the ABCs, they do this song, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then when their parents realize they've memorized the ABCs, they just think, wow, that's amazing. So compare just learning the ABCs to being an English scholar or a PhD. Not even a PhD, let's say somebody's really famous in the English language, like Shakespeare, then there's just a huge difference, right? They're just not comparable in any way. We're kind of like that. We get to the ABCs, or we learn a few words, and then we think we're the sort of most famous English author in the world. But it's just a kind of self-deception and egotism. And so this is why there are so many people online claiming awakening, because they think awakening is a much sort of prior stage, a very kind of lesser, kind of coarse stage of understanding, and also we don't believe that there's something incredibly profound and deep, because we've never ever tasted that. As I said before in one of my previous videos, is once you realize that you've only scratched the surface, then you can come to appreciate the profundity of the Dharma or the spiritual path. You suddenly realize how deep this vast ocean of wisdom is, and that you're only on the surface. And that gives you something to work for. The problem is that most Westerners don't realize they've only scratched the surface. They're sitting there on the bottom of this thin scratch of understanding, and they think that's the profound depths of the spiritual path. And because of that, then they're ready to accept that they and others have achieved awakening. And awakening is a very difficult thing to do. So at some point I went from practicing yoga, and I have to say also at that time that I was practicing Tai Chi. And I took it quite seriously and invested a lot of time into that. And so this is all part of my progressive path. And primarily I was getting to understand what it means to either control the mind or to have the mind in some kind of state of flow. And these are all important things. They're all important things. But they are kind of progressive steps to coming to understand the profound truth. And the profound truth, though, is something else. So after doing that, then I went into retreat. And the way we do things in the West is a little bit backwards. It's pretty much the same for everyone when they do things. We tend to go to the top floor and then work our way down. We try to start off at the top and then work our way down. And that's a mistaken way of practicing, but unfortunately we've got no other way of doing it, because we have such a poor understanding, and also we have such limited access to spiritual teaching and knowledge. What most people do is they get to a certain level and they have to travel to India. For example, I had to travel to India to study with the Iyengars in Pune, and because it was kind of difficult to get any profound level of instruction in the West, in the UK. I mean, there are good teachers in general. It never takes you beyond just the sort of physical practice and a bit of breath work. So many Westerners, then they'll look for somewhere else. They'll look for somewhere in the East. If they don't go to India, then they'll go see somebody who's got an ashram in Portugal or something like that. We always think the Dharma's over there somewhere. And that's kind of a mistaken way of thinking. But until we develop our own kind of base, this base in our own countries of people with sort of experience and realization, then the Dharma will never come to the West. That's something we have to work on. So at first, when I started doing Buddhism, it was mostly for meditation. And I did this at the same time as I was practicing yoga. And it's mostly because I found there was a great sort of lack in education in yogic meditation. It was very hard to get authentic instructions. It's not hard to find people who tell you to sit down and look at a candle, etc., or just rest in the present moment. There's loads of that. It's everywhere. Something profound about that. It was difficult to find a teacher with kind of experience, etc., and to be guided, to have access to an experienced and authentic teacher and to get guidance from them is not an easy thing to do. And so at the same time as doing yoga and Tai Chi, then I started doing Buddhist meditation. And the tradition in meditation in Buddhism is incredibly deep, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. And the other thing is there's a lot of kind of practical methodology. This is a thing that really turned me on, is that there's so many well-documented techniques that you can apply. And with those, also you can gain some very kind of quick results. And when I talk about results, I'm not talking about final results here. I'm just talking about basic kind of mundane results can arise out of it. For example, one of the early things I did was to follow this program called Taming the Tiger by Akon Rinpoche. And I found that really helpful in gaining some kind of preliminary understanding of this Buddhist meditation, and also some kind of worldly signs like the arisal of bliss, etc. That kind of encouraged me, right? You need these things. Now, what generally happens when people are beginners is that they make some seemingly quick progress. But as I said before in my previous video, it's a bit like a young child learning the ABCs. We think it's kind of really phenomenal. But if you compare it to actually being an English scholar, it's nothing whatsoever. But, and there's another difficulty here. It's because as beginners, we make this kind of sudden or seemingly quick progress. And it's only really because we never looked before. We suddenly realize that there's things going on and there are experiences to be had, and we'd never noticed it before because we were so wrapped up in the external world, as Westerners, I say. And then we make this sort of seeming quick progress, and then we plateau. That means for a long time, then practitioners will not progress any further, and it can get a bit stale. But this is because, as I said before in previous videos, there's something called understanding what it means by progress, what progress means on the path. And actually progress is very incremental. It just seems at the beginning that we make quicker progress, but really it's just a very slow and steady progress that happens. And some people will claim there's no such thing as progress and that you don't need to practice, etc. But I suggest that that is a mistaken idea. That doesn't apply to ordinary beings. There's another thing. We have to understand that there's these three types of individuals. They're what we call worldly individuals. And what we mean by worldly individuals here is not somebody who's just interested in money and that sort of thing. What we mean by worldly individuals in this context is somebody who's never looked beyond external appearances. Somebody who has never sort of investigated or turned the mind inwards, or has no interest in this. Somebody who's not interested in philosophy, etc., or metaphysics. People who are just only believe what their eyes can see. These are what we call worldly people. And there are those people who make slight investigation. So most of us are on this level of making slight investigation. And it's not because we don't want to look deeper. Really, it's because we don't have the tools. We don't have the education or the understanding. We don't have the actual tools to look in any profound way. And then there's those who investigate thoroughly, who have thorough investigation. They look at things in the most deep way, the most profound possible way. But this is really only bodhisattvas and sort of special individuals. We don't have this kind of deep insight. We only scratch the surface, as I said before. There's no point kidding yourself on that you are or do have profound understanding. It will only stop you progressing on the path. You'll just get stuck. If you think you've already understood it all, then you'll just get stuck at a very low level and you'll never progress from there. And by the time you get to the end of your life and you meet death, you won't be equipped with the tools to help yourself in the bardo or to pass into the next life. So for me anyways, I wasn't satisfied. I'm not easily satisfied, and so I learned a bit of a Buddhist meditation, and naturally I thought I wanted to take things further, and so the idea arose that I should go into retreat. This is what we hear. They say, go practice, most important thing, especially in the Kagyu tradition. Then we say practice is everything. We're not so into study in the Kagyu tradition. So the first thing I did was I developed this wish to go into a traditional long retreat, which is the 3-year, 3-fortnight retreat. But at Samiling, then we tend to do a bit over 4 years. We kind of take our time. We don't really add anything extra into it. It is the basic retreat cycle that everyone does. We're very similar anyway. on the outside. So why do I say that this is kind of doing things backwards? Because what they do within the Tibetan and Nepali communities is first they study. They basically go to kind of preschool and they study the basics. And then at some point they go to a Shedra. It's like a Buddhist university. And so normally what you do is you study. You become a bit learned about what these things are. You study the Theravedic tradition, you study the Sutrayana, the Mahayana sutras, and then you study a bit of Vajrayana. And once you have a kind of foundation in that, and then you go into retreat. And usually there's a big kind of queue. There's people waiting to go into retreat for many years. Many people want to do it. So it's not like you can just go in a drop of a hat. In the West, basically, you pay for retreat. So it's not about being accepted, or being ready for retreat. It's just when you got enough money, really. My own story is a bit strange, and I kind of lucked out. Things fell together. I managed to get into retreat, and everything just sort of happened spontaneously once I made the decision that I would do that. Up until that point, then, I never thought I would be able to, because I was a very worldly person, with a family, a wife, and children, and all that sort of thing. Car, house, jobs, and many jobs. I used to be very busy with my work. And so I never thought that I would ever be able to go into retreat, but in sort of the day that I decided I'm going to do it, I made this decision and I had this resolve that I just had to do it, and literally from that moment on everything just fell into place naturally. And it wasn't an easy decision to make, because I didn't want to leave my partner. I was very happy in my relationship. It's probably the most happy I was in my relationship that I've ever been in my life. So it wasn't an easy decision to make. But in the back there was this feeling that the Dharma had to be first. It had to be number one in my life. And so that kind of helped me to make this decision. And it's not easy to decide to throw away your entire worldly life and go into retreat for 4 years. It's a difficult thing. And also you need sort of $30,000 or $40,000 at least, just to get started. Anyway, maybe I'll cover that particular topic in another video. What I'm trying to say here is that this first step I took on my progressive path, when I wanted to take things a bit further or go a bit deeper, was to go into a Vajrayana retreat. Now, for most Westerners, this just becomes a tradition. They just end up going into retreat and basically chanting a lot. Often they don't even understand the words, ringing bells, banging drums, and it's kind of a devotional practice. I don't really know what they're doing. They've never really studied the tantras to the extent where they will have a sort of foundation. But that's not uncommon. I mean, it's the same in the East. The Vajrayana tradition is in great decline. There's very few people who really understand what they're doing. I mean, they have the advantage in that they're kind of native to the language, right? So that's a great advantage. But when it comes down to it, we're all basically the same in the Vajrayana. We're not really the sort of individuals who are capable of this type of practice. It's very profound. Most Westerners fool themselves, kid themselves on that they are Vajrayana practitioners, but what it teaches in the text itself is that it's only bodhisattvas on the pure levels who are able to practice the Vajrayana correctly. And that's like, levels 8, 9, and 10. 10th level bodhisattva is basically a Buddha compared to us. Maitreya is a 10th level bodhisattva. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that here. So I did the Vajrayana retreat, but I guess it was because of luck, because it turned out that in this particular retreat, then we had a retreat master who was kind of an authentic meditation teacher. Why do I say that at this point is because it's the first time in my entire spiritual path that I got some kind of understanding of what is meant by the path of direct investigation. And that's because this retreat master was somebody who is sort of a professional, you could say. What do I mean by that? He's a professional at this kind of mind instruction. Well, he's the retreat master for Trangul Gompa. So when I heard that our retreat master would be Khenpo Labu, who is the retreat master of Trangul Gompa, that really gave me great confidence that I was doing the right thing, because I have great faith in Trengel Rinpoche. And in fact, it's Trengel Rinpoche is one of the catalysts that brought me to Buddhism in the first place. It's something that came together, I think anyway, from my past karma, because the entire encounter was kind of very random in a way. It's not something I planned. It sort of just happened to me, and it changed my life. I can't go into the details here. It would be too long. The video would turn out being too long. Anyway, what you need to know is I went into retreat, and on the basis of going into retreat, I met this kind of Tibetan from Eastern Tibet who has a kind of authentic lineage, authentic understanding, and experience in Mahamudra and Dzogchen meditation. And he also teaches this direct path. Otherwise, I would be completely in the dark about what it means to practice the direct path. So for most Westerners, then they've never encountered this direct path or these mind instructions. And if they have, then more often than not, then it's something that's being done as the sake of tradition, or that's been somehow, I don't really want to say corrupted, but there are ways of giving mind instructions that aren't authentic, and they aren't authentic because the students aren't ready for it. So the Lama will teach something that's kind of a semblance of the mind instructions, and that's probably all that ever happens, and it's pretty rare. Even that is very, very rare. You know, I've never really met anybody. Well, there are a few people actually in Samiling who have had mind instructions. Very few, a handful. Other than that, I've never really met any Westerners who have even any idea what I'm talking about. They've never experienced it, so they don't know what I'm talking about. And I had no idea whatsoever. When we're asked by an authentic teacher to look into one of these aspects of mind or of thought, let's say, then generally people think it's kind of a stupid question, or it's a bit obvious. And the reason why we think it's a bit obvious is because we have so many assumptions about how mind works and how thoughts work. We just talk about mind and thought day and night as if we understand it. But once you actually look into it, then you realize that you were mistaken. And this is what happened for me. I was given this question. Well, we were all given the same question. And the first thought was, well, why is he asking that? Isn't it obvious? But I was kind of lucky in a way, because I had great respect for this teacher, and I had respect for him because I knew he was Trengel Rinpoche's retreat master. So I immediately thought, well, he must know what he's talking about. I mean, foolishly, I went into retreat without actually checking out who the retreat master is. The right way to do it is to look and find a teacher first. As I've said before, you need to kind of investigate and find a good teacher first. But of course, I knew nothing about this. I was a newbie, basically. I had no idea what I was doing. I just thought I wanted to take things a bit further. And the only way that I knew one could do this was by going into retreat. So it was kind of doing things backwards. But I lucked out. Or let's say I had good karma, and so there was this authentic teacher. And he asked this basic question, which seemed obvious, and it was almost like most people thought, well, why is he asking this? You know, some people even thought, why is he wasting our time? But thinking to myself, well, there's a good reason why he's asking this, and I'd better look into it well. And then when I did look into it, then I suddenly realized that this topic, this subject, was much deeper than I'd ever considered before, and that the answer wasn't in any way obvious. And then also realizing my basic assumptions about the way mind works was mistaken, then I suddenly had this great faith in this path of directive investigation. I could suddenly see the importance of this process. So I'm just going to skip over this a bit and proceed on, because for you to understand exactly what I'm talking about requires more explanation. And there isn't time for this here. I just want to give you a kind of idea of my experiences of the progressive and the direct path. So I went into this Vajrayana retreat. The Vajrayana is incredibly complicated, and I was wondering, you know, why on earth are we doing all of this? Because we don't really understand what we're doing. And it seemed to me something that was being done just out of kind of devotion and faith. And devotion and faith are important, but I'm kind of persistent, and I wanted to get down to the bottom of things. You know, I wanted to understand meditation. That was my purpose for going into retreat. I needed to know what mind was. I needed to understand meditation. And so, because of my karma, then I lucked out. There was this authentic teacher there, and just with a few kind of words, he was able to open my mind to what the actual eventual goal of meditation was about, what the differences were between direct perception and the progressive path. And generally then, the progressive path is all about kind of metaphors and analogies, concepts, and using outer objects in order to bring one's conceptual understanding closer to the truth. But it's not about a direct investigation of the truth. That is the primary difference. So the retreat ended, and then I got an opportunity to travel to Nepal. And the reason for that was to continue relying on this Lama, because he kind of got my interests going. I got a taste of it, and I wasn't satisfied. I needed to continue on until I understood. You know, I needed to come to understand the profound truth. And I could see how this direct path was the kind of most viable way. It was almost the only way that one could come to understand the true nature of phenomena. And we say, well, what's the point of the progressive path then, if it doesn't lead to understanding the true nature of phenomena? Well, it doesn't lead directly to that. But as I said before, by engaging in the progressive path, then slowly, the mind comes more accepting and is kind of pliable or malleable. It means that the mind is ready to make that leap between a conceptual understanding and direct perception. And that will happen through meditating and contemplating on what one has learned or studied. So they're all very important. All this stuff is important. And I have to say that my yogic studies were also very supportive, because you need to investigate things from all different kinds of angles. And you also have to look at the different kinds of approaches that are used. And in Buddhism, then, we're encouraged to do this. A great deal of our study is studying things like the Hindu tradition and the Vaibhashikas, these kind of foundational levels of Buddha Dharma. We also study in great detail. So I talked a little bit about the different views before. It's not really about one being lower and one being higher. It's more about having foundations and then building on those foundations. And so the Vajrayana view, or the view of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, are sort of the pinnacle. You know, it's like if you build a temple, then you need the foundation stones. Without that, it will collapse. And then you need columns, etc. And these columns are like the Sutra of Paramitrayana. And then the golden roof on the top, well, that's the Mahamudra. But the whole thing is as a whole, right? It's a symbiotic relationship between the different parts. They are all needed for this kind of structure to exist. So I left the Vajrayana retreat. I got an opportunity to go to Nepal, which was quite amazing, because I really didn't think I'd be able to, and I was able to continue my studies. So there, in Nepal, then I was able to experience what is traditionally considered to be this progressive path of vast study. And this is something that Westerners very rarely have access to, unless they're very diligent. They do it by themselves, and they really make a lot of effort. It's very difficult for Westerners to have access to this kind of system of study that gets used in the Buddha Dharma. And so the first few years in retreat, then we studied maybe 4 hours a day, and that was mostly pith instructions, and it was kind of smaller treatises and instruction manuals. Primarily. We were doing kind of what's called mind training. And this was focused mostly on this development of bodhicitta. So they were shorter texts or short kind of commentaries, etc. And at some point then, after about 2 or 3 years, then the Lama decided that he was going to kind of formulate a program for us Westerners to be able to study the Buddha Dharma in an authentic way. And again, I can only say that this just must be down to my karma, because it's almost impossible for Westerners to be able to do this. to any kind of depth. And in order to do this, then we basically had to learn Tibetan. We all had to learn Tibetan, and not just spoken Tibetan, but literary Tibetan. And so we spent 2 years in intensive study of the Tibetan language to become fluent in Tibetan. And why did we need to do that? Because all of these texts exist primarily within the Tibetan language. In fact, many of these texts have disappeared from the Sanskrit language and no longer exist in the Indian tradition. And so they're well preserved in the Tibetan canon. What had happened was about 1,000 years ago, then the school from Nalanda had been brought into Tibet and everything was translated. There was a huge program. It was patronized by the king, and they put a huge amount of resources, and people gave up their lives all to bring this Buddha Dharma into Tibet. And it was a latecomer because the Buddha Dharma had already spread into places like Korea and Japan and China and Vietnam and all these countries, and Tibet was really almost the last place that it went to. So we were lucky because all of this vast canon of the Buddha Dharma was translated into Tibet, and shortly thereafter it basically disappeared from India. It was destroyed in the kind of Islamic invasions of northern India. So it all remains there. And so in order to be able to study this, then we had to basically learn Tibetan, and it was quite difficult. But, quite a large group of us became fluent in Tibetan, and we were able to start this kind of sincere study of the main texts, the scriptures, the treaties, etc. And we kind of started before we were fluent. So in the early days, then we had some translation in English. We started off that way. And then there's a very good Khenpo who had kind of graduated from the Shedra. He'd been to the retreat. And after going through the retreat and graduating from retreat, becoming a Lama, I suppose you could say, then he returned to the retreat center where we were and became one of our teachers. And he started off by teaching us Chandrakirti's commentary on Entering the Middle Way. It's an auto-commentary that he wrote, Chandrakirti wrote. And this is kind of incredibly vast and profound, and we spent almost 2 years doing this. So it's like over 500 hours of classes. And this is kind of what you need to bring the mind to understand emptiness as it is taught in the Middle Way, school of the consequentialists. And, that was an amazing opportunity, because really I don't know of any Westerners who have had that opportunity. So there's this one Khenpo. He's from Boston or somewhere like that, New England anyway. And he went to the Shedra at Trangub Monastery, and he joined the Shedra as a layperson. I mean, he's a monk now, but he's one of the few people I know who have been through the Shedra system. And he's a very, very skilled Tibetan translator. He translates for the Karmapa. So there are a few Westerners like that. And nowadays there's more. There's quite a few Westerners who go to the Gelugpa colleges, and they learn the Gelugpa system. And the Gelugpas really, really go for it. So there's not many. There are a few. So anyway, we started off by studying the Entering the Middle Way, Chandrakirti's self-commentary on Entering the Middle Way. And that gives you a kind of foundation of understanding the logic and the various reasonings, why things are empty, etc. As I said before, this is non-assertive negations. And then after that, we studied Jamgon Kongtrul's commentary on the highest continuum. Highest continuum, Gyur Lama, is the view of the Uttara Tantra Shastras. Uttara Tantra, which is the highest yoga tantras. And these are the teachings on Buddha nature. And again, it's incredibly vast, especially Jamgon Kongtrul's commentary. It's not a small text in any way, and we spent, like 500 hours. And this is what you need to come to understand Buddha nature. And even after studying this in great depth, studying classes, sort of 2 hours every second day, and then your own revision in your own time, etc. And at that time, we were also taking turns translating. So that helped to kind of deepen your understanding of the text, right? If you're translating it, you've got to prepare. But even after, almost 2 years of study, hundreds and hundreds of hours with a learned Khenpo, then it's unlikely that one will actually understand Buddha nature. It's not an easy topic. And so it kind of makes me laugh when I see people on YouTube who have just heard the term Buddha nature or the unborn, and they think it's really easy to understand. Well, it's not easy in any way, because your understanding, it's more likely than not that your understanding will contain internal conflicts. And what that means is that there will always be these gaps in your knowledge, and you will make self-contradictory statements. And these self-contradictory statements will become an obstacle to your meditation on Buddha nature. It's not easy at all. Actually, realizing the Buddha nature means that you're liberated from samsara. You know, it's not an easy thing to do. So we studied that. We studied the Karmapa Mikko Dorji's commentary on the Treasury of Abhidharma. So from studying the Treasury of Abhidharma, then you come to some understanding of metaphysics, or this kind of psychology and science of Buddhism, you could say. And again, these are huge topics. After that, then we studied Pawa Tsongkhap Trengwa's commentary on Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva. So Way of the Bodhisattva is this primary text that's respected within all Buddhist traditions, and it's about generating love and compassion, this thing we call bodhicitta. And again, we did this for years. And recently, then we were studying Mikko Dorji's extensive commentary in the Vinaya Sutra. Vinaya Sutra is all about this monastic discipline, and it's absolutely huge. I mean, some of these texts, like 4 thick volumes like this. And really what you have to do is you have to memorize all of these, all of the root texts, etc. But the older ones amongst us aren't really able to do that. As you get older, you're no longer able to memorize things the way you were when you were young. But all the younger ones, they do it. And they've got loads memorized. So anyway, there's all these names of texts and things, and you might not find this very interesting. But the point here is that on this progressive path of vast learning, what you're doing is you're delving in really deeply into the logic, the logical arguments, the concepts, the examples. So there's ways of exemplifying all these things, the comparisons, numeric, comparisons by illustration. It's really, really profound. You have to look at things from all different sorts of angles. What is the purpose? Well, the purpose of studying, let's say, the 3 baskets, is that you need to understand all the different aspects of the spiritual path. And these aspects include the development of intelligence, right? The development of meditation, for example, and also your conduct or your discipline, the way you conduct yourself. And in terms of the texts we were studying, they're called the 13 principal topics or whatever. Then the first one is for developing a greater understanding of emptiness. The next, Buddha nature. Then to understand metaphysics, which is the way that the physical universe is structured. And then this bodhicitta, which is the mindset of awakening. What is this mind of awakening? Well, this mind of awakening is love and compassion for all beings. We study the Vinaya Sutra to understand the importance of conduct and how that relates to our progress on the path. Not only that, but how vows are relevant, etc. And this doesn't include all the other topics that we had to study, like dialectics and epistemology. We studied the Tantras and the Vajrayana, also the practice instruction manuals. For example, if we have a puja, or if there's a particular practice like the Vajrasattva practice, which is a practice of purification, the biographies of the great lamas like Milarepa and Marpa and all this sort of thing. And also, within all of that, then there's a hell of a lot of it is actually pith instructions from our Lama. So the pith instructions for your Lama is this kind of daily advice on how to think, how to meditate, what are our conceptual mistakes in our life. Really, a lot of what pith instruction is the Lama chastising you or telling you off, And it's really important. It's also important in other traditions. I mean, if you look at the Zen tradition, then they use this to a great extent in order to bring the student's mind closer to awakening. So all of that, every single bit of that, is what is called the progressive path. These are all ways that we progress. And progress is incremental. Slowly, the mind needs to be changed. And really, it needs to be changed on a profound level. It's not easy to change the mind. People who think that you will just sit down for a few minutes, look in the present moment of awareness, and then bing, you're going to get enlightenment, are kidding themselves on. You literally have to rewire your brain. You have what are called habitual tendencies, and these need to be undone. And so some people, they're much stronger than others. Those people who have lightning or sudden realization are people with massive stores of karmic residue. That means from birth they are special. If you look at these Zen masters who had these sort of sudden realizations, they were born as special individuals. You know, they were little children and they went off into the wilderness and meditated in hermitage spontaneously, right? When they were little children, they asked difficult questions of Zen masters. They weren't just ordinary beings. It's like Guru Rinpoche became enlightened by his teacher pointing at the sky. Well, that's not us, right? We're not just on the verge of becoming awakened. We're kind of very ordinary, very mundane individuals with kind of mundane likes and dislikes. And we're very attracted to outer appearances. We believe in the reality of the world around us very strongly. These individuals who achieve sudden realization are already, their minds are already very pliable. They already have some kind of heightened intelligence. If you look at the Karmapa, you know, who is a reincarnate Lama, since a young child, he could spontaneously memorize thousands of pages of text. These are signs of previous practice, you know, in other lives. So anyway, I'm not going to go on about that. The point I want to make is that this progressive path is important. It's something you should always do. You should always be studying. You should always be reading things like the Heart Sutra, you know, reading inspiring biographies of past masters. These are all things that will act as a catalyst or impetus for you to gain realization. Now, on the other hand, there is this path of direct perception or direct investigation. And the mistake, the primary mistake, as far as I can see, that Western teachers make, is they think that the direct path means a shortcut. But there's no such thing as a shortcut. So people often quote this Zen master, Bankai, who talks about this sort of lazy path to enlightenment, which is realization of the unborn. But you only have to look at his own life story to see that this isn't something easy to achieve. I mean, he was one of these Zen teachers who at a young age had this sort of predisposition towards meditation, and he kind of left his secular studies and went off into the wilderness to meditate as a hermit. And he did this for years, you know, living in abject poverty as a beggar. And at some point, then he gained this realization about the unborn. And the unborn is basically the Buddha nature. This is what I was talking about before. So he realized the unborn, and then he went to seek out a teacher to kind of ratify or confirm his awakening. Now, to start off with, we tend to think we can do it all on our own. But there's this incredibly kind of well-respected historic master in the Rinzai movement who had discovered this path, this lightning path, let's say. But he himself then sought confirmation of his awakening. And when he sought out the Chan master to affirm his awakening or level of awakening, then the Chan master told him that he had still something missing. And so he had to return into retreat and continue practicing. So if it was just spontaneous and he didn't need to do anything, then to start off with, why did he have to spend so many years in retreat? And not only that, why did he have to go back into retreat to continue his studies and to gain further realization? So eventually it was confirmed the Bankai had achieved final awakening. And what did he do when he heard that news? Well, he went back into his hermitage. He went back into the wilderness and lived like a beggar and continued meditating for the rest of his life. He didn't just sit on his laurels and say, well, time to retire now. I'm already enlightened. There's nothing to do. So people have got this idea that there is a kind of lazy way are just kidding themselves on. Because even the people who teach the lazy way aren't lazy, right? They're not in any way lazy. They're incredibly diligent. Milarepa was the same. He gained enlightenment. What did he do? For the rest of his life, then he still continued to meditate in caves in the snow. And also you have to look at the methods they use. For example, Bankei, how did he teach his students? Well, he chastised them. He swore at them. He beat them. His own teaching says that he believed the way to break down the ego and come to realize this unborn was through self-criticism, right? So he wasn't the kind of teacher who would sit there telling his students, wow, you're so good. Oh, you must be awakened. You know, you're already Buddha. You have nothing to change. He didn't do that. He told his students off. He was ferocious. He was famous for swearing at his students, putting them down, and beating them even. So, you know, you have to, what we tend to do in the West is we just see the stuff we like in the texts. You know, we see these sort of babas who smoke marijuana and we think, oh, I like that. I'll choose that. Or, oh, there's an easy way. It doesn't require practice. Oh, I'll choose that. So we kind of pick and choose all the stuff that's just sort of in harmony with our own way of thinking. And the problem is we're lazy. So we pick and choose all the wrong things for all the wrong reasons. And then we just sort of develop our own kind of meditation school and we follow that. We never get anywhere. And then we wonder what it was all about, you know, when we get to our deathbed. So don't do that. You can't pick and choose. I mean, if you choose two different, completely contradictory teachings and you try to make them work, you're just going to go around in circles and waste your time. That's what most people do. If you talk to them, then they'll make one statement that contradicts another, and they just go around in circles. And that's because they're doing this. They're just kind of picking and choosing different things which are contradictory based on their preferences. And the Buddha taught that's not the way to do it. What the Buddha taught was that we've got issues, we've got suffering, right, to start off with. That's the first truth. We've got suffering. We need to get rid of that. Well, what's that suffering based on? And then there's all these kind of things we have to do. And then there's what's the way to achieve enlightenment? Well, it's a sort of eightfold noble path. It's sort of correct action, etc., correct way of thinking. So we're not enlightened, right? And very often we're not even very good people. When people criticize us, then we get angry, right? We're desirous. We like things. We do what we can to get what we want. And because of that, we bump up against other people and we are complicit in the suffering of others. So don't be like that. You need to recognize your faults. Even Bankei had said that. He said the path to this unborn realization was self-criticism, right? So you need to recognize your own faults. And if your teacher tells you you've got something wrong with you, then don't get angry with them. He's just doing what Bankei told him to do, right? It's the same in the Tibetan tradition. Anyway, this is an incredibly long video, and I'll have to make subsequent clips to explain maybe in more detail on this path of the Vajrayana and this path of direct investigation. But for now, that's about all I can do. And I thank you for your undivided attention, and I will see you next time. Bye.